You can't tell, but this pile of books goes all the way to the floor and it's not very sturdy. Definitely gonna fall down any second. Hi everyone, last week at the beginning of a video I said I was going to film a gift guide, and as usual I was going to recommend books not for you, well sometimes for you. I said you could ask for a recommendation for yourself, or if you were buying a gift for someone and you were stuck, to leave a request and I would answer as many as I could in this video. There were hundreds of requests, so I'm not going to be able to answer all of them, but I think I'm answering at least 50 here. So if I don't get around to answering your question and you're really stuck, leave it in a comment down below in this video again and I'll answer as many of those as I can. I have pulled books off my shelves. I have a list here of the things, the requests that you asked me, and let's get into it. That's it. That's the video. It's a Christmas gift guide where I'm recommending books for you to give to yourself or to other people. So firstly, Squirrel's Bookshelf said, I have a Christmas request. My best friend is a happily married gay woman and I would love to find a feel-good story for her, fiction or non-fiction, with a lesbian relationship. She's also a scientist who loves magical books. So if there's any way of bringing those things together, I would recommend A Portable Shelter by Kirsty Logan. This is a short story collection with queer stories in it, but they are being told by two women who are married and who are expecting their first child. So one tells stories to the unborn baby when their wife who is carrying the baby is asleep, and the other one tells stories to their child when their partner is out at work, because they have told each other that they're not going to tell lies to the baby or untruths, and they're worried that stories fall into that, but secretly they both want to tell stories to their children. So I would recommend that one. I would also recommend Kirsty Logan's books in general if you're looking for great queer relationships between two women. Okay, Read It and the Right said, oh hi Rachel, hi Jen, I'd love a recommendation for somebody who is interested in Japanese culture and wants to get back into reading. For them, I would recommend these. You don't have to get them, all of them, obviously, depending on how generous you're feeling. I'd recommend getting one or two of these, which are published by Strangers Press. They are a small independent publisher in Norwich, and they have 3 pamphlet series. This is their Japanese series. They also have a Korean one and a Dutch one. They publish both new voices and some well-established voices from that country in translation, and they put them in these beautiful pamphlets. I just think they're a really great way to get into translated fiction, to sample new authors and see who you might like, and then you can go out and find out if they've got more books and purchase those. So I think that's a great way to get into Japanese fiction. Christine said, hi Jen, I'm looking for a biography for an 11-year-old girl. She adored the diary of Anne Frank. I'm cheating very slightly because this is and isn't a biography, autobiography. This is When Hitler Stole Pink Rabbit by Judith Kerr, which is one of my favorite books of all time. I've written about it, I think, in an article, which I'll link down below if you want to find out more about it. But this is Judith Kerr's life. She's just novelized it slightly, but it's all the things that she experienced as a child. So she grew up in Berlin. Her father was a journalist and writer, outspoken against the Nazis. So in 1933 they left, moved to Switzerland, then moved to France, and then they moved to England. So she's talking about going to school in all of these different countries, learning different languages, and what that was like. And I just adore this book, so that is the one that I would recommend. Erin said, I'd like a poetry recommendation for someone who loves Harry Lindsay Bird and Maggie Nelson. I recommend Mary Ruefle. She has that same wry sense of humour that both of those writers have, and I love her poetry. So check out some sample poems online and see if you think it's the kind of thing that your friend would like. Rebecca said, hello, I would love a recommendation for a friend who loved the Millennium Trilogy by Stieg Larsson, a strong female lead if possible. I know I'm a broken record by this point, but the Frida Klein series by Nikki French, which has a fantastic female lead called Frida, set in London. It's about a series of murders. She is a psychotherapist and she gets tied up in all of them. It's an 8-book series. The first one is called Blue Monday. I don't think I need to talk about it anymore, but don't worry, I still will because I'm predictable. Emma said, a book request here. I'm a big lover of Anne Sexton and Sylvia Plath, but would really like to find a similar poet and read some new poetry. Can you recommend a highly confessional female poet who might fit in well with Sexton and Plath? A good poetry book to enjoy over Christmas would be fab. Thank you. Okay, so I've picked out 3. These were all in beautiful order, but then I made them into a pile for the thumbnail and they may or may not have fallen over, so I had to piece everything back together. Okay, my 3 recommendations for you, and again, what I would suggest is looking up sample poems online and see which of these 3 speak to you and go from there. This is Girls Are Coming Out of the Woods by Tishani Doshi. This is No Matter the Wreckage by Sarah Kay. And this is Everyone Knows I Am a Haunting by Shivani Ramlokan. The next one was, I would love a book recommendation for a person who loves reading about 1. Women during World War I and World War II, 2 unreliable narrators, and 3 ghost stories. Thank you. Okay, so my recommendation for this is Life After Life by Kate Atkinson. I loved the first half of that. I didn't love the second half so much, but that was because it was set during World War II, and I don't always love books set then. But if your friend does, then I think probably that won't matter. It is a book about a woman who lives her life over and over again, and she can't remember living those parallel lives. But every time she gets to a point in her life where she's died in another life, she gets a moment of deja vu. And I would say because of that, she's not necessarily an unreliable narrator, but she is a complicated narrator and she kind of half knows things. So also it has that ghostly element because it's almost like she's haunting herself. Plus it is set during both World War I and World War II. The storytelling is brilliant. Recommend. Dee Dee said, hi Jen, this year I'm looking for a book for my dad. He loves history and loves to accumulate stacks of chunky historical non-fiction books, but I've noticed that he recently hasn't been reading as much due to COVID. Do you have any historical non-fiction recs that are relatively short and engaging, something to use as a whetstone to work his way back up to the behemoths that he usually reads? I do, and they are all by one author, and these are big, but they are mostly pictures. The text inside is fascinating, but I'm just saying that because you said short. These are chunky, though I know what you mean about huge historical books. They're not as big as those, but these aren't small either. So these are all by Ed Brooke Hitching. He has one that has fewer pictures in called Fox Tossing, Octopus Wrestling, and Other Forgotten Sports, which is hilarious. It is a history of sports, and I have not gifted it to anyone who didn't like it, and I've gifted it a lot, but he's written lots of other books, including The Phantom Atlas. So this is all about maps of places that don't exist, and the hilarious reasons surrounding the existence of the maps, not those places. This is another one which came out this year. It's called The Madman's Library, The Strangest Books, Manuscripts and Other Literary Curiosities from History. So they're really digestible because every few pages are focused on one particular subject and then it jumps around a lot. He works on QI, so he is just full of fascinating facts, and that's what these books are. They're fantastic. So that is my recommendation for you. FIFA said, hi Jen, do you have any recommendations for books centered around nature? I really enjoyed Lanny and the Overstory and would love something similar. So because you mentioned Lanny, I'm going to go with that short, weird nature book as opposed to the Overstory, which is long and weird. This is a short and weird one called Follow Me to Ground by Sue Rainsford. And I think if you enjoyed Lanny, you'll love this too. It is about a father and a daughter. That was another one of the requests, actually. It was about father-daughter relationships. That would fit into this as well. They're not human. We don't really know what they are. They have to bury themselves within the ground to heal themselves, and they do that with locals too. So they're local healers. People go to them when they have ailments, but they're also very scared of the father and the daughter because they appear to be otherworldly. So it is about people's relationship with the earth, specifically their relationship with the earth. And as you can see, it's got on the front lungs that grow into trees. I don't want to say more about it, but if that sounds up your street, I would recommend that. Anna said, hi Jen, could I ask for a book recommendation for someone who loves Oxford, murder mysteries and the 50s? Okay, so this is not set in the 50s, at least it's not set in the 1950s. I think it's set in the 1650s, does that count? But it is a murder mystery and it is set in Oxford. I haven't read this one yet, it's on my TBR, but I've read other of Ian Pierce's books. In fact, I'm recommending another one here somewhere, and I love his writing. It is a huge one to lose yourself in over the winter months. So if you want to check out the blurb for that one, that would be the one that I would recommend. Someone said, hi Jen, I'd love recommendations for uplifting books, struggling with lockdown and need some cheering up and self-care type reading. I made a whole video called Comforting Reads at the beginning of first lockdown back in March, so I'll link that video in the description box down below. Lara said, hi Jen, it would be great if you could recommend some fiction/non-fiction about science in the Victorian era. It's a small treat for myself. Okay, so non-fiction, this is Science in Wonderland, and this is about how science influenced fairy tales and children's literature, and I thought it was brilliant. It is by Melanie Keane, and then as for fiction, this is a proof copy, but this is The Doll Factory by Elizabeth McNeill, which is set in the 1850s, and it says that the Great Exhibition is being built in Hyde Park. Among the crowd watching the spectacle, two people meet. For Iris, an aspiring artist, it is the encounter of a moment forgotten seconds later, but for Silas, a collector entranced by the strange and the beautiful, that meeting marks a new beginning. I think this one is primarily focused on artwork, but because it is about the Great Exhibition, it's also going to be about science, and it's set during the Victorian era. Rachel said, how funny, I was going to ask for a book recommendation based on Piranesi, which I showed in the video where I asked for your requests, and then you held it up first. It's a gift for myself. I haven't stopped thinking about Piranesi since I read it, and I would love to know if you've read it, if it made you think of other books similar in tone and vibe. So I haven't read Piranesi yet, but going by the blurb and what people are saying about it, it reminds me slightly in tone of In the House Upon the Dirt Between the Lake and the Woods, which is by Matt Bell, and this is about a house that grows and reflects the owners. So there are rooms that contain parts of their personality, and it lives underground. It's really strange and bizarre. So if you're wanting some extreme magical realism, then you might want to check that one out. Oh, Laura asked this really interesting question. She said that she would love a recommendation for a friend who likes contemporary books and films like The Wicker Man, bleak British landscapes, and male witches. I struggled. I don't read many books with witches in at all, full stop, but I did come across a list of books that have male witches in them, so I will link that in the description box down below, and you might want to perhaps think of purchasing Cunning Folk, which is a magazine all about witchcraft, and it's about herbal remedies and ghost stories and lots of other wonderful things. It's beautifully illustrated. The first issue is out now, the second issue is coming out in the new year, and I just really think it's a bit special. Fairy Folk Review said, Piranesi was the best book I read this year. May I request book recommendations for someone who loves fairy tales, folklore, and magical realism? And if I can be cheeky, I'm going to recommend my own book, which is The Beginning of the World in the Middle of the Night. This is a collection of 12 haunting tales that have folklore elements and magical realism thrown in. They're about a world where people breed ghosts in their lungs and then cough them out into the world. There is another world where people buy hearts online and they put them inside their own bodies or their partner's bodies. One of the stories is about a couple discussing the middle of the world in the middle of the night. Another is about a coffin hotel, so a hotel on an island where people go and spend the night to travel to the world of the dead for a very high fee. So yeah, that would be my very cheeky recommendation. And then you asked for another recommendation, which was for someone who is fascinated with Shakespeare and psychology in fiction. So I don't have my copy to hand, and I don't know if your friend would like to read this given what's been going on this year, but Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel, yes, is a post-apocalyptic dystopian book, but it is about Shakespeare, and it is about long-standing narratives. So at the beginning of the book, it's about an actor who dies on stage playing King Lear, and then after the pandemic happens, there is a group of people, an acting troupe, who go around acting out Shakespeare plays, trying to bring that magic back. And the plays that they put on are reflective of what is going on elsewhere in the book. So there's a lot of intertextuality going on, very playful and very beautifully woven. So that would be a recommendation from me. Okay, next, someone said, I would like something like the movie Arrival and the Book of Strange New Things by Michelle Faber. Not much the same, but I would love to read a compelling sci-fi that really grips you on a spiritual level and makes you think about what it's like to be human. So sci-fi that's less about the sci-fi part, but tackles themes like language, culture, music, gender, and religion. Okay, so I would recommend a few books. Michelle Faber's Under the Skin. has similar themes to the Book of Strange New Things, but it's not set in space, but it is about what makes us human. It's really eerie, so tense, lots of weird stuff going on. I love it. Then I would also recommend Pew by Catherine Lacey, which is about a person who wakes up in a church and the local community don't know who they are, what gender they are, what religion they are, what country they're from. So they call them Pew because they discovered them in the church. And then they try and make them fit into all of these boxes that they want them to fit in. And it becomes really sinister and claustrophobic. Again, it is about like humanity and what we value as humans. And then I would recommend these two graphic novels, which are similar in feel to the film The Arrival, and one of them is actually called The Arrival, and this is by Sean Tan. A silent graphic novel, heavy on the magical realism, about a man who travels to another country to escape war, and he feels like this is a very alien place. So Sean Tan uses magical realism to highlight the strangeness and the scariness of being displaced and finding yourself in a new country that has different rules and regulations and a different language that you might not understand. It is just so magical and heartwarming and lovely. And a book that is the same, I would say it's very similar to The Arrival, is The Wanderer by Peter van der Ende, which is about a paper boat which journeys to lots of different foreign lands and experiences and sees lots of different things. This is all in black and white. There is the little boat right there, and it experiences lots of different weathers, lots of different creatures, but none of the creatures are like creatures in our world. So again, it uses magical realism. So there are whales that don't really look like whales. There is a spread where there's lots of different sea creatures, one of which is like an elephant, but it lives in the sea. Where is it? Here. This double page spread here. So here is an elephant up here, then we've got like a cat, mer, fish thing. I think my favourite spread is this one. Look at that. All of these fish staring open mouths at this paper boat and wondering what the hell it is. Kirsty said, I have a Christmas request. I have a friend who loves detective fiction, particularly murder mysteries, usually not set in the present day or with present day technology. He loves Agatha Christie, but I wouldn't like to get him one of her novels because he's read so many and I don't know which ones he hasn't read. He also writes his own detective fiction and it's always usually without modern technology. Also, if there is a possibility of LGBTQ plus detective fiction, that would be great. So in general, old school fiction, I would recommend the British Library crime classics. They're fantastic. There are a whole series of them. They're normally 3 for £2 on their website. They also always have one book in the month that's only £5. And there's just so much there. I read the Santa Claus Murder last year and loved it. Has been a bit hit or miss with other titles, like some I love, some I really don't, but I'm going to do a video soon where I sample more of those. I realise that's not helpful because you need the recommendation now, but have a look through their website and see if anything takes your fancy. As for queer mystery fiction, I would recommend The Paying Guests by Sarah Waters, which is historical fiction, so it doesn't have modern day technology, but it isn't about a detective who's solving a crime. It's about some people who are covering up a crime that they have done. So it has that mystery element and it does have court scenes and stuff, but it's from the inside as opposed to the outside. And then there is a series which I can't personally recommend because I haven't read it, but I have heard good things, called Fade Out by Joseph Hansen, which I think is a modern day murder series, and the detective, the protagonist, is openly gay. So you might want to check that one out as well. Next one was, hi Jen, I have a non-binary friend and would love to give them a book with a non-binary character or narrator, or at least someone who uses they them pronouns. They love sci-fi and fantasy. A book they really liked last year, for example, was Frankenstein by Jeanette Winterson. Danez Smith is an amazing genderqueer poet and uses they them pronouns. I'm also going to link a list in the description box down below of non-binary characters in sci-fi and fantasy novels. I also wanted to recommend this, which is not my primary recommendation, but because they enjoyed Frankenstein, I would also recommend The Stone Gods by Jeanette Winterson, which is about two queer people who appear in different periods in history and in the future, and their love story is almost like the story of our world and how we treat it. history is doomed to repeat itself, but the love that they share is really strong as the world around them is falling apart. It's very strange, but brilliant. Mark said, "Hi Jen, I would be grateful for a recommendation for my niece who is 10. She likes Harry Potter and arts and craft, but the book doesn't necessarily have to relate to those things." Okay, so I haven't read this book yet. I just bought it and I'm super excited to read it, and I've heard lots of amazing things about it. This is Where the Mountain Meets the Moon by Grace Lynn. This is about a young girl called Min Lee who lives in the valley of Fruitless Mountain, where she and her parents spend their days working hard in the fields. At night, Min Lee listens to her father's tales about the old man of the moon who knows the answers to everything. Min Lee sets out on a quest to find the old man of the moon. He will know how she can bring good fortune to her family, and along the way she meets many magical friends, including a talking fish, a powerful king, and a dragon who doesn't know how to fly. Lavender said, "I'm looking for a novel to get for my mum. She'll be finishing her chemo treatments and transitioning to radiation for Christmas. So I was thinking of something on the chunkier side to keep her company, since she often has to sit in one place for so long. She loves Jane Austen, the Bronte sisters, Madeline Miller and Tracy Chevalier. I got her the other Bennett sister a month ago and she adored it. Historical fiction with a side of whimsy and or mythology is her vibe right now." Okay, so I would recommend this, which is The Illumination of Ursula Flight. I'm showing you the spine because this is a proof copy. This is about a young girl called Ursula Flight who wants to be a playwright, and she wants to go out and do all these things in the world, but she's born in the 1600s. It is so funny. I loved it. I haven't read Longbourn yet by Jo Baker, but so many people who loved the other Bennett sister said that they loved this too, so that will be another recommendation. And then finally, I would recommend maybe, well, not finally, I have two other recommendations. Perhaps a Persephone gift voucher for her, because if you get a gift voucher from them, they send you their catalogue, and it's so fun to go through the catalogue and pick out titles. If you don't know who Persephone are, they are a publisher in Bloomsbury. They publish fiction from the earlier half of the 20th century, and mostly forgotten books written by women, and they are an absolute delight. So that would be maybe a gift to consider. And this one isn't historical, but it is whimsical, and because it's set in an old sleepy English village, there's something about it that feels very old-fashioned, and sometimes that's in good ways and sometimes it's in bad ways, because there are a lot of characters in this book who cling to their traditional values, but really that's just racism. But this is about a man called Bilal whose mother passes away, and she says, this is right at the beginning of the book, she says, "I want you to build a mosque in our village." And Bilal thinks, "I'm not going to do that. I have assimilated. I am not going to go to my local council where I'm on the board and say that I want to build a mosque." But then that idea kind of plagues him a bit, and he thinks maybe he should. And it's just full of all of these little village vibes of people getting at each other all the time. And as I said, some of that's really sinister, but some of it is, Henry hasn't chopped his bush back recently and I'm going to write him an angry letter about it. And in those instances, it's funny. It is also chunky. The audiobook is great. So that's another recommendation as well. Manda Panda says, "My husband got into reading finally in lockdown, mostly dragon adventure stuff, but has read and loved both Isabel Greenberg's graphic novels. Feeling the pressure to encourage but not overwhelm him. Did you know that there are 3 Isabel Greenberg graphic novels? So if he's loved the first 2, this is the 3rd one, which is called Glass Town. And I'd also recommend the graphic novel The Gigantic Beard That Was Evil by Stephen Collins. So yeah, you might want to take a look at that." Anna said, "I'd love a recommendation for a Christmas present for myself. This year, my favourite fiction books were Circe by Madeline Miller, 2 Min-Jin Lee books, 1,000 Ships by Natalie Haynes. Generally, I love a good family saga book. Or I recently discovered the whole world of modern interpretations of Greek myth. So I would recommend An American Marriage by Tayari Jones. This is a brilliant book, which is slightly a myth retelling. I won't tell you which one, but it is at its core. But it's also playing around with If Beale Street Could Talk by James Baldwin, which you don't have to have read, but it is examining the racist judicial system in the States, and it's about a marriage that's falling apart when one half of that marriage is sent to prison. I don't want to say too much more than that, but it is really, really brilliant. Amber said, my Christmas request is for my uncle who loves to read but is looking to branch into poetry. He loves gardening and nature, so I would recommend How to Fly by Barbara Kingsolver. Lots of these poems are about the environment, and I'd recommend Slant Light by Sarah Westcott. A lot of these are about gardening or about immediate nature that is just outside your front door. Next up, hi Jen, I'm looking for a book for my mum, literary contemporary fiction focused on character development and relationships, not romantic. She got me into reading and this is the first Christmas we spend apart, so I'm looking for something extra special. Thanks so much. Okay, so I'd recommend, where are we? The Vanishing Half by Britt Bennett, which is about two light-skinned African-American sisters, and one of them decides that she's going to try and pass as white, marries a white man, moves away, doesn't tell anybody about her family, and the other sister marries a darker-skinned African-American man, and they have a family together, and she goes back to stay with her mother. So it's looking at the trajectory of their lives, the generation after them. It's about racism and colorism. It's based on the novel Passing. It's really, really great. And then I would also recommend, where are we? Too many books scattered around me. Is there a thing as too many books? Here we are. This is A Place for Us by Fatemeh Fahi and Mirza. I know I've mentioned it so many times, but it's so good. It is about an Indian American Muslim family. It spans 20 years of their lives. It's about their relationships. The character development here is so subtle and amazing. So that's my other recommendation. Nadine said, hi Jen, I hope you're doing well. I'd love a book recommendation for my mum who loves nonfiction, especially about the Holocaust, serial killers and other true crimes. She thoroughly enjoyed This Is a Woman by Sarah Helm. Any assistance would be greatly appreciated. I would recommend After the Eclipse by Sarah Perry. Give it a Google, read the blurb. I bought a copy of this for me and for Mercedes. I haven't read it yet. I know Mercedes did and really, really loved it. So that's my recommendation. Hilda said, hi, I have 3 requests for book recommendations. I would love a picture book about monsters with lots of illustrations for someone who wants to be inspired by the artwork. I did have a couple of bestiaries, like collections of different monsters. I couldn't find them, so I'll link some down below. But I would also recommend this, which is not monsters, but it's called Beasts of India. But the way that these are drawn, this is by Tara Books, who I recommend heartily. They have such amazing drawings in different art styles. So this is a snake, but then this is a snake here too, which has lots of different eyes. So it's more abstract. So it becomes kind of monster-like. So this is a wild boar. These are just a series, as I said, of illustrations. A buffalo, this is an interpretation of a crocodile. I love this elephant. This one's not very monstrous. An elephant. I just adore it. So definitely check out their illustrated books. I will link their website in the description box. The next one was a book about nonfiction. No, a nonfiction book. For someone who is struggling with depression, searching for meaning, Absolutely Hyperbole and a Half by Ali Brosh, which is hilarious but also deep, and it probes into all of the right places. It will make you cry and it will make you laugh, is what I'm saying. And then a poetry collection about a toxic relationship. This is prose poetry / essay. I would say it's more on the poetry side. This is Bestiary by Lily Huang. It is about toxic relationships, and it is about Vietnamese folklore, and the pressures of finding someone and pleasing your parents and staying in a relationship that is not for you, but you feel like you should. Hi Jen, thanks so much for another beautiful and cozy video. You're welcome. I was wondering if I could get some recommendations for my mum. She lectures American and African American literature, and her favourite authors are Toni Morrison and Edward Denecat. And I was wondering if you had any suggestions for her that aren't Girl, Woman, Other or Red at the Bone, because she has already read these. I would recommend Black Sunday by Tola Rotimi Abram. It starts in Lagos, and I think then comes over to the States. I read the beginning and really enjoyed that. It's about two sisters and the different paths that they take, and it begins in the 90s. And then I would also recommend work by Akwaeke Emeze if she hasn't read them before. I have read Pet and really loved it. This is their middle grade. I also really enjoyed Freshwater, and their latest one I've heard amazing things about, which is called The Death of Vivek Oji. So you might want to Google that one as well in case your mum has read previous work by them and wants something new. Charlotte said, "Hi Jen, book recommendations wanted please. I have just discovered fantasy as a genre through Erin Morganson's The Starless Sea and The Night Circus. I loved them and wondered if you could recommend more fantasy novels with a similar magical romance type feel, escapism, please. I would recommend The Gracekeepers by Kirsty Logan. I think this does have a similar feel to The Night Circus. It is about a circus in a floating world and North and her bear. And it's really, really lovely. And it does have romance in it too." The Purple Bookworm said, "Christmas request for myself, please. It's going to be a bit of a strange one, but would you be aware of any kind of graphic novel, graphic memoir dealing with mental illness, especially depression and anxiety, and or recovering from sexual abuse / trauma? I would recommend the graphic memoir Becoming Unbecoming by Una, which I will, well, I'm not going to link everything down below, but I'll insert the cover here. If you give that a Google and have a read of the blurb and see if that's something that you would like to read." Ashley said, "Hi Jen, I'm looking for books for 2 8-year-olds who are good readers. I want to get them each a few books that they can read independently. One is a girl who loves Harry Potter, so something that is fantasy or adventure, but with a girl main character would be amazing." So I have a couple of recommendations for that. Again, these are scattered all around me. Okay, so I have 3 recommendations. This is The Infinite, and this one I haven't read, but I'm super excited to read. It is about leapers, people who can leap through time if they're born on the 29th of February. So if they were born in a leap year and they have to solve mysteries. This is D by Michelle Faber, which is about a young girl called Dicolo who's from Somaliland, and she has to travel into another world to save the letter D from the alphabet. And then this is Pages & Co. Tilly and the Book Wanderers, the first in a trilogy about a young girl who realises that she can book wander. So she can travel into books and interact with book characters. And the other recommendation you asked for was for a boy who experiences a lot of pressure to perform masculinity. So something where the main character breaks gender stereotypes would be great. Okay, so I would recommend books by Katie and Kevin Zhang. I think the Sam Wu books are maybe a little young for him because my nephew reads them and he's just turned 7, but you could look into those, and they are about being vulnerable and admitting that you have anxiety about certain things. So I think their books in general are great for defying gender stereotypes. They have a book which I would say is more for that age range, so 8, 9, upwards, which is Dragon Mountain, which you might want to check out. But I'd also recommend this, which is Wonderstruck by Brian Selznick. I know this is huge. This is partly graphic novel and also part written book, and it is about Ben and Rose, who exist in 2 different time periods. Rose is deaf and she lives in the 1920s, and she is outraged because she loves going to the cinema to watch silent films, but they're going to introduce talkies and that's going to prevent her from being able to enjoy going to the cinema. And Ben is living in the modern day and he has hearing loss in one ear, and then that extends into another ear. So he is experiencing temporary hearing loss, which may be permanent, he doesn't know yet. And their stories kind of intertwine and it's brilliant. And all Rose's sections are told through pictures, and it's Ben's sections that are told in prose. I had 2 requests which I'm going to recommend the same book for. In fact, I have 2 sets of those. So one of them was, "Thank you so much for your videos. I'm a bit stuck at the moment. I'm searching for a book for my niece who's 11, who is currently starting to be interested in LGBTQ+ issues. And I love this, and I would love to support her in her journey. Do you have any recommendations for that? English is not her first language, we're German, but she's learning it at school, so maybe it shouldn't be the hardest English either. And then someone else said, hi Jen, your video is perfect timing. I'm looking for a book for a recommendation for a 17-year-old slightly geeky niece who loves anime and all things Japanese. Now I know these are two very different age groups, 11 and 17, but I think this actually fits for both. And I read it last month in November, and I loved it, and it filled me with such warm fuzzies. It's brilliant, and that is the Dragon Tea Society by Katie O'Neill, and it's about a girl who comes across a dragon who is lost, and she takes it back to its owner, who is someone who works with dragon tea. So these dragons grow branches out of the tops of their head, and they each grow tea that can be brewed in different ways. So this particular dragon here is called Jasmine and grows jasmine tea, and she learns all about these dragons, and it has several queer relationships in it. Great disability rep too. I love it. So I think this is great for lots of different age groups, and heavily inspired obviously by Japanese tea making. I loved it. I want everybody to read it, and it's warmed my heart, and I've ordered the sequel. It's great. And then the other two pairs together were my request is I'm looking for books which have unique, unusual magic world systems with many rules and guidelines. Preferably nothing more than a trilogy, but a standalone would work best. And someone else said, hi Jen, I'll try and give you a challenge. My husband loves philosophy, Marvel comics, hockey. Maybe he loves Hockney too. Traveling is a therapist and a dad of a 1-year-old. His favourite books include Nausgaard's seasonal series and His Dark Materials. Any ideas? So for both of those, I would recommend Arcadia by Ian Pearce. It's a standalone. It is inspired by His Dark Materials, but you don't have to have read His Dark Materials to read it. It just has those little nods. It is about parallel universes, and it is about time being experienced in different ways. It is about how science reacts to those things, and how science and time react with storytelling, and how you can write things into being. There are lots of different rules, there are lots of different systems, and it's just absolutely brilliant. Someone said they were looking for recommendations for daughter-father relationships, and I'd recommend Museum of You by Caris Bray. Someone else said, another double pair, and this is the last one. Hi Jen, I'm looking for a book for my 17-year-old sister. She loves LGBTQ plus themes, maybe more YA suited, but I think also doesn't have the confidence to pick up books she's not sure of. She does also love crime and horror, so maybe something that would transfer. And someone else said, I'm looking for a recommendation for my sister. She would like to try out graphic novels, and so would like some for Christmas. She loved The Haunting of Hill House on Netflix, so would like to find her something on the creepy side of things. She's at college doing interior design and is all about the aesthetics, so something with a beautiful color scheme or interesting art style would be great. So my recommendation would be Emily Carroll. She has such a beautiful color palette. She has a series of graphic stories in a book called Through the Woods, but my particular favorite is called When I Arrived at the Castle. This is a little bit sexy, so definitely for older teens, queer. It's about a woman who arrives at this castle, and it's owned by a woman who is trying to seduce her, but it's very odd, and it's kind of inspired by the fairy tale Bluebeard. Let me try and find a spread that I can show you. Yeah, here we go. So she lures her in with stories, but what is real and what is not real. And as I said, the color palette is amazing. So those are all my recommendations. I hope that that was helpful. As I said, if you're still stuck and I didn't get round to your recommendation, leave it in a comment down below here again, and I will try and answer you there. I hope you're all doing okay, and I will speak to you very soon. Lots of love. Bye.